Would you like to know how to make an Uckers board? Let's go and make one.
Okay, first we need a piece of board which is perfectly square. We can use other materials. We then need a pole with which we're going to be making the counters, and I'll tell you about the size of the pole a little bit later so we get the correct size of counters. We also need some varnish, some masking tape with loads of newspaper, and the spray paint with which we're going to paint the board. I'm now going to pass you over to the lovely Samantha to talk about board design.
Thank you, Paul. First, your board needs to be square and ideally made of a strong and robust material. Wood, laminate, and metal fit the bill very well. An Uckers board is made up of 15 squares by 15 squares. We suggest that you use millimeters as the default measurement unit to ensure that this is done as accurately as possible. Our board is 600 millimeters square. So, dividing that by 15 means that each square needs to be 40 mm by 40 mm. The home bases take up the 6 squares from each corner along each side of the board. 2 things about colors and their positioning. It's usual to use red, green, yellow, and blue as the home base colors. However, there is nothing stopping you trying something different and original. Also, it's worth pointing out that there is no standard positioning of colors for Uckers, it's all down to personal preference. For our board, we are going to be partnering red with yellow and green with blue. The middle 9 squares are converted into right-angled triangles by drawing 2 intersecting lines through the center of the board. The 5 squares below each triangle are colored the same as the home base, representing the home channel. The home base doorsteps, the exit squares for players coming into open play, are also colored accordingly. With the major primary colors now defined, only the remaining in-play squares need to be colored. Traditionally, these are white, but again, it is down to personal preference. Paul is going to show you how to paint these when he shows the build in progress. Finally, you can personalize the board even further by introducing insignia, logos, photos, or slogans for each color. Here, we are honoring the 4 armed services, the Royal Navy, the Royal Marines, the Royal Air Force and the British Army, by including common logos for each of them. And one final touch, we're going to try and include the Uckers.com logo for the home center as well. The only remaining element required to make a functioning Uckers board are the pieces. These are traditionally made from broom handles, cut down to give us the 16 counters. However, wooden poles are readily available from wood merchants and DIY stores, so you don't have to upset your partner by leaving them with a short handle. Your counters should have a thickness of between 8 to 10 millimeters. The diameter of the counters depends on the size of your squares, and they should never exceed that. With our board, the size of the squares are 40 millimeters, so we are going to use a pole with a diameter of 30 millimeters. You will need 16 counters, 4 for each color. Some people like to make 5 of each color, just in case one is misplaced or eaten by the dog. Okay, now let's go back to the workshop to see how we make the board.
Thank you, Samantha. For our board, we're using MDF, which has a smooth finish, so I'm going to sand this to give us a bit more of a roughish surface, which will help the paint stick. This is important because the paint will otherwise peel away if we start using masking tape. Next, I'm cutting the pole to make the counters. Here I'm using a table saw, but any jigsaw or manual saw is perfectly fine. I'm going to be making 20 counters in all, so that we have 5 of each set. Starting with the back of the board, wipe it down with a damp cloth to remove any dust. Using an old box to prevent spray going everywhere and putting the board on painter's pyramids, we're now ready to apply the first coat. After shaking the can vigorously for several minutes, apply the paint in a vertical and horizontal fashion. You're probably going to need several coats to get a full covering. Moving to the front of the board, mark up the centre 3 columns and rows. These are the in-play squares that need to be painted white. Using a set square like the one I'm using here makes the process very easy indeed. There is no need to mask the rest of the board here, so go ahead and spray the middle columns and rows. You will need several coats to get a good finish. Having sprayed the in-play area, mark up the squares as previously shown. Make sure that the sides of the squares are correct. At this moment, using a pencil is fine and is probably advised just in case you make mistakes. To make the home triangles, draw the diagonal lines through the centre of the board as previously shown by Samantha. Masking is a time-consuming job. It needs to be done thoroughly and accurately. Do one colour at a time, remembering to mask for the home base, the home channel and the home triangle. As we're going to use our logo in the centre, we aren't going to be spraying the middle, but you should be doing this. Once you are happy with your masking, start spraying. Always spray away from the masking tape edge, as leakage can often happen. Also, don't forget to paint your counters too. Again, you will need several coats. Work your way around the board, leaving several hours between coats and changes of colours. If you do get paint bleed, don't worry. You can always remask and paint again. Here's a little tip. Mask off the back of the board completely to avoid paint contamination whilst you're painting the front. It will save you having to paint it again, something that I learned much to my cost. Before marking up the squares, check that your customization is going to work. Size and colours are important. Here I printed off the logos to the right size and made sure they fitted into the home bases. On both of the Royal Marines and the RAF logos, I had a colour problem, so I had to repaint these again. Totally avoidable with better planning. Once you are happy with the painting of the base colours, you then need to mark up all of the board. I did this using a Sharpie pen. Use a beveled ruler turned upside down to avoid smudging. Once the board is marked up, you can then add the logos. These were available from the internet. They were files that had a transparent background, and I printed them on a self-adhesive acetate and fixed them to the board. This is not quite the effect that I was hoping for, but it was good enough. All that's left now to complete the board are to add the finishing touches. We start off by varnishing the back of the board. 2 or 3 coats should be sufficient. Flip it over and varnish the front of the board. In order to stop dice rolling off the board, you might want to add some beading. This should be done now, and then subsequent to that, varnish the beading as well. And then you should have a completed board. Starting with the back then, you can see that I've added corner felt pieces. This means the board can be placed on your Queen Anne dining table without having to call out the French polishers after. I've also added a couple of acetate stickers, one to call out the 8-piece Hall of Shame and the other being the uckers.com logo and tagline at the bottom. I'm not particularly happy with the stickers. The imagery should have just blended in with the background colour, but hey, it still looks okay, I think. Moving to the front of the board, I'm pleased with the uckers.com logo in the middle. The Forces logos are a bit obvious on the acetate, but as with the back, it still looks okay as a functioning Uckers board. As I'm not a particularly competent DIYer, I'm happy with the board overall. It has that feel of a handmade Uckers board with all the imperfections we're probably familiar with. Could I do a better job next time? Absolutely. But I know that I'm going to get hours of enjoyment from this board before I consider making another one. To finish off this video, I'm now going to give you a list of top 5 tips to take note of when you make a board. This is based on the experiences that I've had in putting this one together. The first one is plan your design meticulously, including the colours and the sizes of any customization you might be planning. Number 2, be mindful of copyright laws for images that you might wish to use. Number 3, be accurate with your masking of areas. Mistakes can be recovered, but they can cost time and money. Number 4, consider how best to customize. Acetate might not be the best. You might want to consider decoupage as an alternative. And finally, number 5, allow lots of time for coats of paint and varnish to dry. Don't be tempted to rush it. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have enjoyed it, please click the ravishing like button and don't forget to subscribe to other videos coming from uckers.com. Thank you.